I'm not going to stop for too long because certain things that I was going to say, I'm very happy that Harry spoke about them, especially with what concerns the issue of potable water. And one thing that I'd like to say, there are certain things when it comes to legal framework, when it comes to for housing. I think my colleagues talked about it before, but one thing that I'd like to remind people is also the issue of what we call really a good houses, a decent housing. There's a series, there's an ensemble, there's a series of 9 criteria. There's a total of 9 criteria for a house to be respected. It's like I could call it a screening list to say if that house is a good house. The house has to be give you enough adequate private adequate privacy. It has to give people enough space for people to be able to go to move around. And also it needs a good maybe in a space in one hate. The third thing is you have to have a good security system. In other words, it has to be a housing where there's we're not talking about just putting things together just like that. We're talking about security in terms of natural catastrophe and things. There has to be good light. The people they have to find lights for nights. There has to be enough openings so people can breathe properly. Yeah, for better. They also need all the basic infrastructure for in these housing units. In other words, everything that you need like kitchen, etc. You also have to be at proximity to the person's employment, person's work. I'm happy that he said something important. You cannot build a house at 20 kilometers when the person doesn't have transportation. Doesn't get transportation. That is correct. All services. The services have to be close to the person's house. One of the last things which are very, very, very important, one of very important criteria. All those criteria are very important, but that one is very important in the situation. In the country where we live, the housing has to not be too expensive. So when we looked at all those criteria, those screening lists, we're asking ourselves this question: is housing the houses that we have now, for instance, Casimir Village, does it respect these criteria? That we have a good housing. We know that there was a series of organizations that has a series of reflection. It was about 50 organizations that were met under the initiative of FACA. They discuss a lot of issues. They talk about how people are living, people's living conditions, how it was important for people who are working, people who are being evicted, forced find reparation. One of the things that caught my attention is a question of photocopy solution. Shelter is a solution, is a carbon copy solution, but it's not a real solution in the people's problems. Do you understand? You understand what we mean by carbon copy? It's something that gives a certain appearance, but that doesn't really bring forth the solution to the problem that we're dealing with. So the tea shelter, there was one of those things. It was a carbon copy solution. The other thing also is, which is in that sense, is a series of engagement. One of the biggest engagement, it is engagement to keep on fighting, so they can find houses to live. And fighting does not simply mean demonstration, beating each other up, throwing fists, but also, I think that one of the things that Harry, we're very active in when giving recommendations. We want to give recommendations so things can move forward. We have a series of recommendations. I think that we spoke so much. There's a bunch of recommendations that we've talked about. One of the things that I wanted to say is that not to forget that even before the earthquake, there were 20% of the territory 80% of the population lives on 20% of the country. 20, the vast majority of them live in Port-au-Prince. So it's very important that in the national plan of housing, we focus also on how to really, even this morning we're talking about that, the issue of decentralization. We cannot just do housing in Port-au-Prince because in any case Port-au-Prince is not Haiti. We're running away from the issue of Republic of Port-au-Prince. This is why we had all those people died in 2010. So it is important for us to pick another option. And I think, for instance, us in GARR, we noticed that some people who went to Plateau Central and they just stayed there, but they also have to find an alternative. This is why we say that the problem is multidimensional. It is important also that we stop, because one of the issues that we have, the problems that we have, people build however they feel like building. The people have a capacity to build. They have and the poor neighborhoods people build at night. That also shows you that tells you that we have a state, we have a government that's functioning only during the day. But we have to realize that government has to also function at night. The government should not function just during the day. It should function 24 hours, 7 days. The other thing also, and it's very important, it is that issue is not only in the hands of the private sector only, because if it's only in the hand of the private sector, it is very clear. If the private sector doesn't see that they have a lot of money and they're not making a lot of profit, they're not going to build. Well, we are not thinking. We were thinking more in terms of housing, social housing. In other words, it's important that the government invests and don't leave it just in the hand of the private sector. And if the private sector is dealing with it, it has to be done in a way so other people, the most vulnerable people can find houses. Because we say houses. It is true that it is important that the government has some control somewhere. We're not saying for government to take it, but there has to be some kind of a marriage between what government and what the private sector is doing, so that more people can find houses. And when we're talking about good houses, we're talking about houses that are due to all the screening lists that we had on the board before, on the screen before. And also the issue of housing, it's linked to all the other rights. You have to have the infrastructure. We have to consider them together. The issue of right, education, health, and all those things. They do them together to put them in the context of housing rights. The last two things that I'd like to say, which are very specific, because in general we build houses. It is not just in housing, but all the projects we have is a project we have not just like that, without having specific consideration, where specific groups. You have to not forget that when you're building houses, the society doesn't have people who have just their two legs. Some people don't have both their legs or both their arms. I think that if we're building houses, there are families that are handicapped and they cannot live in those houses. The other thing that's important also that we should not forget, it is that we live in a society where there are 54% of women. Our country has 54% of women. So it is important that we consider women and children's specific needs in the housing project. This is why we have the principle is the dignity of human being. If we're building houses, we have to respect the right of people. It's the right person's right to live like a human being. It is the duty of the state of government to make sure that the person lives like a human being. Thank you.